All right. Thanks for being here. Writer, among other things, Mark Smith. Where do you do most of your writing?
Generally sitting in my recliner trying to ignore my children.
Okay. Do you have a electric recliner or a manual recliner?
Well, I'll tell you what, I had electric because of the fact I had
Mhm.
a knee replacement. I've had both hips replaced. My wife ended up having a hip replacement. So it was one of those things where somehow or other she started sitting in it. And once that happens, you never get it
Mm.
back.
Yeah, you got to get two recliners when you get a recliner.
Well, yeah, so I got the manual, but we're doing okay, and
Oh, the
she's
manual.
doing
Okay.
well. So
The electric recliner, we went with that because you can stop the legs at any point. The manual one, it's like it's down, it's up.
mhm.
So the electric one is nice because of that. There's a place that makes them in, I think it's Alabama is where we got them. So it's a USA made recliner, and it's not one of the ones where you sit in it and you're like, oh, this is the end all be all of comfort. But I've never gotten up from it and thought I'm aching. So I think
Right.
that's a win as far as anything you can sit in goes. So it's good.
Well, I think any kind of furniture, especially beds or anything else, if you can get up from it and not be hurting, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Because the old adage is things aren't made the way they used to be made, and I think that's the truth with a lot of things. And it kind of goes with people too, in a sense. Used to. Uh, a handshake meant something. People were made differently. And then today, you know, the first thing we have to be concerned with is the contract and what's the exit strategy on the contract. So I
Mhm.
feel like we've kind of gone the same way as the furniture, to be honest.
Yeah. I wonder how much contracts contribute to polite civilization. Like there has to be a point where you get overly litigious, but there's also probably a point where it's something that's written down so you can say, hey, this is what we agreed to. I mean, I like a handshake deal like everyone else, but there are times where you go, I wish I had that recorded just so I could make sure I'm not the one that's crazy, or I'm not the one that's thinking that something happened that didn't. Mainly, this is in marriage. Like I would like to have a recording going on of conversations. So if it ever came down to somebody told me to do something and I was like, I don't remember that we could go back to the tape, a little instant replay and say, well, see, this isn't what was said. So
I've been married 32 years. I think that would get me in more trouble than not. But anyway, but
mm,
no, I understand what you're saying. And again, going back, I, one of my attorneys back years ago when we lived out in Texas, I sat and we were having lunch one day and I asked him, what's the most important part of a contract and I really expected him to say, well, it helps everybody know what they're supposed to be doing. Just, the standard answer. He said, no, the most important part of a contract is the exit strategy because that is determined on how much fervor an individual will have to fulfill that contract. That makes a lot of
mm,
sense when you think about it.
mm-hmm. It
So,
does. You get held to
uh,
your word.
exactly. And, right when I think in my life and writing the book that I wrote and so forth, uh, I did not really understand, for instance, the whole thing about love one another, all this kind of stuff. I don't think I really understood it, and I thought big man upstairs. I grew up a lot of my life just thinking he was a lot of hot air. Could he fulfill a contract? What contract did he fulfill? And therefore, I was taught a lesson. And I can say that of the lessons I was taught, and it can kind of go into a contract. But One of the lessons I was taught was that one of the most important things that a person can have in their life is a foundation. You would hope if you go into a contract with somebody, they have a foundation of truth.
Hmm.
But that's, of course, we know that's not always the case. But there were a lot of lessons that I did have to learn. And it started off from my childhood. And I think a lot of times when we understand where we come from, we can understand a lot of where we're going, but we can always change the road. We can always change the road. My dad was beaten with chains as a kid. I didn't beat my kid with chains.
That's probably a good idea.
I'm telling you. So,
What do you what do you think then the reason that we're here is? It's just for a little light conversation starter. What's the reason we're alive?
Oh yeah, that's really light. That's saying what's the meaning of life? Just can't tell it to me in 2 minutes. I'm just kidding with you.
Yeah, the meaning I think might be a little bit different than the reason, but I don't know. Why do you think we're here? Why do you think we're experiencing this life, this reality, this program, however you want to call it?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I have to. I look at it from the faith standpoint because really, um, with a lot of science, there's a lot of science involved that kind of lends toward that direction. I'm not trying to proselyte anybody or get anybody, to. I'm not trying to sway anybody or anything like that. I can just only speak for myself. But um, I don't know if you have children, but I have children. For the most part, I really enjoy being around my children. And for a being that's known as a Heavenly Father, I would expect he would enjoy having children and being with those children as well. He certainly would have the power to do it. It's one of those things where people can probably drum up I don't know, a million different answers. And I was on a show about a month ago, and this guy mentioned about uh, the designer of the universe. And I simply asked him, I said, I understand where you're coming from. I only have one question. You mentioned a designer. So, I mean, who is the designer? I'd love for you to just explain that to me. This is not a debate. I'm just hoping you would follow up with your question, with your answer.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me some kind of long story about a watch and a watchmaker. And I said, well, you haven't given me your answer. Who's the designer? And he just said, I don't know. And I said, well, at least I respect that. You don't know. I have to go. There was a book written a long time ago, and several of the things in the book went into one generation of the resurrection. So that's my choice to follow that. I'm not saying everybody's got to, but that's my prerogative.
I think there's a lot of, for people, we get caught up in what the words of things are, like the names of things, or we might be talking about the same thing. We're just using different words. Like if we call this that we're living in a reality, we could also call it a program. And if you do that, you're going to aggravate some people because they're going to say, well, no, this is not a program. We're not just programs here. But I mean, just let that wash over you for a minute. It answers so many questions and goes right in line with religious teachings as far as I grew up with, because what's a program? It's created by something. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a creator, there's God, whether you want to call it the designer, the universe, God, whatever.
Right.
Whatever name you give God, something created it. So we can agree on that.
Sure.
That's a start.
Yeah.
And then if it's a program, how is a program different than any sort of what we think of as this reality? Like if we are in the matrix, a program, something like Tron, whatever, it's, if you know that you're in it, then what? I mean, how are you going to get out? There is no escaping the matrix. So you're here for a reason. So then it would come back to my question of, why are we here? Why are we experiencing this life? And if you go with the, it was made, so it's made by something for some reason, is it just a hobby? Are we just an ant farm? Or if you take faith out of it altogether, are we just luck? It just happened this way, and molecules bump together and something happened and something happened. There is no creator. There is no intelligent design. We are just here out of luck.
Well, it makes sense.
Okay, that's the end of the conversation there because you don't have anything else to go for. But I think there probably is a reason for being here. And after thought and deliberation, I think that my working understanding of life right now is we're here to observe our perspective and experience life, experience being here. So there's some reason bad things happen, good things happen, and we experience it all and we feel it. So maybe that's the reason why. That if there is a creator of everything, the ultimate powerful, all knowing, if you were ultimately powerful, would you know fear? I don't know. I don't know if you, I think your understanding of fear would be different. And certainly, I get into heaven, hopefully, or wherever is after this. And God says all that stuff about perspective and feeling was completely wrong. I go, okay, you got me. What's the reason? But it makes sense to me now. If you put all those Bible verses in about do unto others and love your neighbor as yourself and all that, that if we are here experiencing this life to feel it, I think while certainly God from the religious aspect is all knowing, maybe if you are an all powerful being, you don't know what it's like to be afraid of dying or afraid of the things that a human's afraid of. So you have to experience that somehow. And then when I get into these religious conversations with people about our reason here is to glorify God, then my question is, what does that mean? How do you glorify God? Are you glorifying God by experiencing life and developing and feeling through this perspective? Or, maybe this took a little more of a religious turn than you were expecting, but what do you
No,
think
it's
about
okay. I went to seminary.
Yeah. I went to a Catholic school.
Okay, cool. See, that's a nice thing though, is, where you can bounce things off one another in a sense. Very often in today's society, people, they're so afraid that they don't know everything, that everything turns into an instant debate and an instant fight, and it really doesn't have to. Now, you said something earlier that I thought was really neat, and about the molecules bumping into each other, and that gets right back into the sense of where do the molecules come from? So there you go. And I appreciate the fact that when you talk about God, you understand the omniscient, the all-knowing, that kind of thing as well. And that with us being given the ability to choose, and being from the Catholic Church, I don't know. I'm going to ask you this in a second. I'm curious. Okay. Now, I've been approached by someone that was possessed. I've also had dinner with somebody, and literally they had preached a revival meeting that lasted like 6 weeks, and it was 4 or 5 months. It could have been a little bit longer. I mean, I can't. It's been years ago. But this guy, and he was a young kid, like trying to uh, play a prank. This guy was like between 50 and 60 years old. And he had this darkest, raspy voice that said he was coming after us. And he said, "You know who I am." We could tell by the tone of his voice who he was. But when he said, "You know who I am," we didn't have a feeling he was telling us that he was this particular former minister. Now, being in the Catholic Church and going to Catholic school, or I shouldn't assume Catholic Church. You said Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, those kind of experiences, are they talked about or taught so that the reality of demons, that kind of thing, uh, you guys understand it, or is it kind of a hush hush? How is it presented to y'all?
I mean, I've been to masses before, and I've been to a Catholic college and graduated from a Catholic college, but I'm not Catholic. I'm a
Okay.
Protestant, Southern Baptist,
Okay.
raised on that from Sunday school to 18,
Yeah.
church every Sunday, Sunday school, all that.
Right.
And I'm glad I have that base, as you were talking
Mm-hmm.
about before, that religious
Foundation.
or
Yeah.
the moral base.
Mm-hmm.
As Omar says in The Wire, the TV show, a man has got to have a code. And I think that's where, if you can get to the religious code, that's a pretty good one. The problem is there's a lot of different religions with a lot of different moral values. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the sketchy part, is how do you know which one is correct? And is the one that you're in the correct one, and you just got lucky and you're in the correct one? I don't know. I
Yeah.
went to the Catholic school to study religion.
Oh,
So
okay.
I have criminology and a religion degree. But
Oh,
as far as evil in the world, certainly that exists. I mean, I don't think there's a way to deny that. And there's
do you,
probably more, there's a lot of evil in the world, but I think the more evil, or the way evil gets its traction, is from the people that don't do anything to stop it. So I think that's the challenge of
that's
humanity.
interesting. That's interesting, man. Uh, I've read all this. Well, some of these studies that have come out, and they really surprised me on how individuals are so quick to say yes, there's an evil, but then not say there's a not evil, or there's a
Yeah.
heaven
Mhm.
and there's not a heaven but a hell. You get where I'm coming from.
Yep.
And it's something, I don't know if it's the conditioning that we're, as people, we are in a sense conditioned to just absorb the negativity of life. I'm not really sure what it is, but that I think about that sometimes, and it's sad in some ways, because there is so much good, and there's a lot of love in this world as well, and there can be a lot of respect, a lot of things, just like you and I are talking, man. I mean, we're from different parts of the country, you know but there can be love and respect. My goodness, you get where I'm coming from.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I wish that kind of message could be shared a lot more. Uh, you know, when you were talking earlier, and about what to believe, if you end up being an unlucky one or whatever, for me, uh, my personal view is that because of the history involved in it, whether you go back to Tacitus, Lucian, Josephus, those. So many of them were not Christian. They were not trying to further a faith or whatever. They were just pure historians. I think that gives us a basis. It does for me. Okay, I can't really. I'm not going to say that for other people. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but with that giving me the basis, then the way I worship or the style of worship that I enjoy or whatever. My point is that if those guys wrote about Christ in 40 to 50 years after the crucifixion and those kind of things, well then that's a and they weren't Christian, then I'm like, okay, these guys these guys to me seem like there's something behind what they're writing. And then of course you have a base, but then just like rear ends, basically, everybody's got one, everybody's gonna have an opinion. And hey, I respect their opinions. I guess that's why I don't get into religious debates. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. I like to hear the reasoning other people, like the thought process of any religion. I think that's important. And there's a lot of agreement on what people think, but you never can get to it because you hit that one thing that either side can't agree on, whatever it is. And then you're ready to go to war over it. That it's, if we were, and I think this is what you were talking about earlier, if we look for the things we do agree on and leave those other things aside for a moment, then I think we would find we're all at least on the same spectrum of ideas, the human spectrum, if everything's a spectrum.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. I mean, how can Christianity grow when everybody's fighting each other? You know what I'm saying? And what kind of witness does that tell the world, really?
Yeah. People,
Because, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say,
Witness.
like, for instance, uh, we can view things in such different ways. When I was a professional wrestler, and at first I was Mark Smith, a guy who wrestles. Now, that's healthy. I'm Mark Smith, and I'm a guy that wrestles. Where I made the mistake and really lost my way totally was when I became the wrestler, Mark Smith. You see which one came first, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And through some of the things that happened to me pretty young in that, I mean, yeah, I had a hatred toward God in a lot of ways. I didn't like people getting up and talking about how rosy their life was. I look at people and I go, okay, so you're telling me I'm no better than that guy or I'm worse than that guy, so I'm the one that's cursed. I mean, me and the big man, we went to war. And then there were miracles. I mean, well, let me take, for instance, he and I have it out. Now I really got ticked off because all these really good people started hanging around me and I couldn't stand it. And then I walked into a hardware store and I heard a tap, tap, tap on my right shoulder. And there was this old geezer. And he said, "Sir, excuse me, son, I have a word for you." I said, "Okay, yes, sir." And I'm thinking, boy, you tap me like that, you're going to hear some words from me too, brother. I mean, that's the way I felt. And he said, "You don't have to go to school the rest of your life to be a preacher." I'm like, what the crap?
Hmm.
Well, anyway, about 2 or 3 weeks later, tap, tap, tap. It's a woman. "Son, I have a word for you." And at this point, I really do. I'm thinking, what drugs are you guys on? Because man, I want some. I really want some of this hooch or whatever it is. I want it. And a few weeks later, tap, 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 same exact thing. tap, 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 8 times.
Hmm.
8 times in about a 3.5 month period of time. I go, a school calls me, a school out of Iowa calls me and says, like, we want to give you a free ride. I feel like I'm getting pushed into school. I had gone to school 1 year right after I left college, and I was going to report to spring training for the Atlanta Braves. And that 1 year, I ended up with a 1.11 GPA. And look, I worked so hard to be that stupid with a 1.11 GPA.
Hmm.
I mean, I was drunk the entire year. And on an American history test, who wrote their name very large so the king would have no trouble seeing it? Well, I wrote Jack Daniels. And, of course, that was the wrong answer. But I was just so far away from everything. And then these tap, tap, taps. When I did become a Christian, I realized in my own heart, I had to go to a lot of people, probably close to 200 people, and just say, look, I screwed you over. I'm sorry. That's what was on my heart. I had to make things right. And so I went back to that college that had where I had that 1.11 GPA, told the dean about it. The dean started crying and said, there's one thing I want you to do for me, Mark. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, go get your books and start classes. Now she thought she was doing me a favor, and inside I'm screaming, no, no, I do not want to go to class. I withdraw my apology. No, no. I did not want to go to school. But then I met a lady named Brenda. She told me, she says, in my dream last night, it was kind of like a prayer. And I said, well, tell me. She said, I think I know I'm supposed to marry a minister. And I look up in the air and I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. We go to a service together, church service together, just a lot of music, kind of like a concert type deal. Mm-hmm. And this woman, at first I go, God, just me and him talking. Am I going to be single the rest of my life? What's going on? Just kind of give me a heads up. I don't feel like wasting my time on stuff. Let me know. Thanks. That's a real formal prayer, right? I mean, face it. But I think those are the most real ones, if you want to be quite honest with you. Mm-hmm. Right after the service, a woman tap, tap, tap on my right shoulder. By this time, I was so paranoid of feeling taps. And this woman, her hair had gone from white or silver to white, whichever way it goes, to blue. This woman was purple. When she spoke, it was like sawdust came out of her mouth. She was so old. Okay. And she said, son, I have a word for you. I'm thinking, not again. Yes, ma'am. And I put on this fake smile. She said, whatever you prayed for, the answer is right beside you. Well, I look to my left and there's a 75-year-old guy or 80-year-old guy with a shirt on, thin as a rail with jeans. And on my right, I'm looking at Brenda and I look and I go, God, I pray, please let you be talking about Brenda, please. And we've been married 32 years now with 8 kids, 3 biological, 5 adopted. And, brother, I share that it really did happen. not everybody's going to have that kind of story. There's people in this world that have a much more powerful story than I do. I'm just saying what happened. And we shouldn't compare stories. So that's not what I mean. I don't mean it in that way. But, it was really strange today when we came on and I was trying to read you. You come on and it's different when a person's on camera. It's not like you're in the room reading the person, reading the
Mm-hmm.
room. You're kind of reading the person, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading you and I saw you as a real serious guy. I knew you were smart, first couple of things you said. But as we began to talk, what I'm seeing more and more is I'm seeing a guy with a great heart. But if we would not have taken time to know each other, we would never know that about each other. And I think that's a great message about what we're doing right now to the listeners, to the viewers, everything is just take time to listen. Take time to listen. Show a little love, and a little love goes a long way.
Yeah,
What do
the
you think
lost
about
art of
that?
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people it just goes back to that finding the commonalities versus the sticking points between people is you could probably get along with a lot of different people that you don't think you could normally get along with. And the problem is we deal with our perceived notions of what we think another person is just off those quick judgments. And sometimes, sometimes you're talking to somebody you won't have a lot of common ground with. And that's just the way it is. But
Right.
certainly if you meet somebody with animosity and with your own animosity, it's not going anywhere. Like with policing, when you go up to stop a car, if you start off as an asshole, you got nowhere to go as the police.
That's right.
But if you start off as respectful and nice, why not start off that way? Then you can always turn on the nasty and then turn it off if you have to, if you're trying to get a point across or whatever, using the verbal judo. But I think that's just like talking to people regularly. We get caught up in our own stuff and we forget that we're talking to another person that has their own stuff too. So I've heard a lot of different ways of people dealing with that. Joe Rogan's way that he deals with it, podcaster, comedian, Joe Rogan, says he looks at everybody as they're just somebody's baby. That person was a baby.
Okay.
Like that person was a baby at one point, and they're just living life. And I like that. That's not really how I do it. I think about it sometimes because if you're going through your ways to get along with people, that's a good tool to have in that toolbox of you can just go, oh, well, this is somebody's kid. But I think I look at it as this is maybe the more religiously out on a limb way I would discuss our reason for being here in life in general is that if we are all one, if we all came from, we're all at very least the creation of something, whether it's chance or design, then we all have a commonality anyway. But if you look at those scriptures and everything that talk about, and they're in different religions too, about treating others as yourself and love your neighbor as yourself and do unto others and all those things, that it would make a lot of sense to me if outside of this reality, we are all one, whether we're in one place or whether we are all part of the same thing or whether we all are the same thing. And the reason we're here is to separate the whole to get all these different perspectives so you can then feel what it's like to go through this, feel what it's like to go through that, what it's like to be treated like this and treated like that, to have these things, to not have those other things. that that's the blessing of life, is that you exist here to be able to experience it. So I think it goes back to, it also makes sense with the namaste, the I bow to the divine in you, that you hear from some
Mm-hmm.
religions. And if there's divine in all of us and we're all part of the same thing, the creation of the same thing, whatever, that why would I treat myself badly? Why would I want myself to treat me badly? So I don't think sometimes I think that's kind of a narcissistic way to look at it, because your reason for treating someone well is because you think they're you. That's weird.
Right. That's, yeah.
And there are things I don't understand and things I can't see beyond as a human. But on the surface of it, I'm okay with the idea that there's some kinship between us all,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even not just human, but everything, every living thing, everything that's not living, every molecule and atom. Maybe there's everything, there's some sort of relationship with. So why abuse anything?
That
I
makes
don't
a
know.
lot
I
of
think,
sense because, I mean, if you're relating to animals, you're relating to anything, food supply, anything in the world. I get where you're coming from. I totally see where you're coming from in that, and it is something because you mentioned Joe Rogan. Man, I have been watching a lot of Joe Rogan on YouTube lately, and uh, you remember back years ago when he really was breaking in and he got really big on he was making fun of the church or making fun of Jesus, etc. But then now, he's talking with the likes of Jordan Peterson and different people like that. Have you noticed that he seems to be a guy, and I say this with full respect, that um, maybe he's come to that point in his life where he's searching, which I think that's a great thing if he is. I mean, I'm not knocking him. Okay. I think we all have to, we all keep learning.
Mhm.
Have you noticed that about him?
Yeah, it's changed a lot since those first few ones. Like, I think I started watching his with regularity, his podcast, and maybe he was in the 3-digit ones, a couple hundred, like the episodes. And then I went back. I was like, these are interesting. These conversations, people
Mm-hmm.
connecting. It's like you're in the room. You can't say anything. I mean, you can say stuff, but nobody's going to respond
Right.
because they can't hear you. But
Sure.
you have that human connection, and it's just like hanging out and talking. But I tried to go back and listen to or watch his first ones, like the early ones, and I was like, "Ooh, well, that's tough to watch." Maybe you had to be there for that. But I have seen a change in. I mean, I don't know Joe Rogan, but
No,
I
I
have
don't
seen a
either.
change in how he talks about things.
Yeah, I
So
just
you
totally
feel
go
like
with
you know
you.
him because you've heard him talk about
Mhm.
so many things and talk to so many different people. So,
Right.
I mean, if you listen to one podcast of two people or a conversation between two people talking for 3 hours, you're going to know them more than you did when you started. So if you listen to
Mhm.
hundreds of hours of a person talking to other people, then, I mean, you're going to know them. It's got to be surreal for him to have so many people that know his views and thoughts on things that he doesn't know them. So, but
Mhm.
I mean, that's with anybody that's in the public eye, I think. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen a change and a growth in the way he talks and thinks from my perception of it.
Yeah.
Just like I've seen it in me too and other people.
Right. No, I get where you're coming from. Yeah, I didn't think we'd be talking about this. I think this is really cool, though. My son-in-law is a big Jordan Peterson fan. Okay,
Okay.
and so and I it was in, I guess, maybe Jordan's home where he's got his own little studio or whatever, where he's talking into a condenser mic,
Hmm.
and he had been doing a lot of shows, and they've been primarily on the crucifixion, if I remember correctly. And a lot of the people he had talked to had actually been on Rogan's show.
Mm-hmm.
And so Peterson, he gets really serious, and then his his voice starts to crack, his bottom lip seems to shiver. And he says, I was my own obstacle in accepting the fact that there's historical proof of the crucifixion. And he says that, and I'm bugging out watching on the same computer I'm watching you, right? I'm like, what? And then he said some of the most beautiful words I think I've heard, and that is, I think he says, I believe the reason I could not really accept the crucifixion was because the enormity of responsibility I would have to carry in knowing that someone would do something so great for myself. I don't know. Have you seen that clip?
I haven't seen that one. I've seen a lot of Jordan Peterson stuff on certainly the Joe Rogan podcast, and then just other clips I've looked at on YouTube. But I mean, I've seen a change in how he talks about things too, because I don't think he was very religious when I first started, when I first knew of him. And
Right.
now he seems much more. So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think it,
he thought the church, I remember him saying this, he thought the church was just a group of people trying to do good. I remember him saying that's almost verbatim what he said. That's the way he viewed, and he said that's the way he could compensate for the enormity of the crucifixion, was just say a group of people doing good. And so anyway, I look at that and the way they're talking and how this new, I don't know if it's a hunger or a thirst or whatever, is going on. And having met you, and we're talking about this stuff, and again, what we were saying earlier, if we'll just hear each other out, if people can just talk, and you're right, you were talking about that trigger, that go to war trigger that some people seem to have. If we could understand that the way you may view God could be somewhat different than the way I do, but I may actually learn something from what you say, or you may make a light bulb go off that's never gone up, and it helps me understand my own understanding better.
mm-hmm.
And people are afraid to do that. I think when people are so afraid to explore their faith, I think that's a fear. I think that's their fear. Do you think about that the same way?
Yeah, I do. And I look back at like Sunday school, being raised in the church and things, and just thinking about things as a kid. And certainly I don't remember everything, but I have those things that stick in my mind where I go, well, that doesn't make much sense to me. And then you ask a question about it, or like I can remember in discipleship training, which was like a Wednesday night thing you go do.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And they were talking about cults and what makes a cult a cult. And we're talking about other religions. And I'm pretty sure that they said Catholicism was a cult in this Southern Baptist thing. And I was like, that's what makes a cult, and what makes a religion. And do other religions think that we're a cult? And is there any one religion that's got it 100% right on everything?
Yeah. I don't believe there is. I don't believe there is.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of a lot of things, and that's why you need to talk to everybody else. But and even then, I think you have some amnesty with the Creator, with God, with whatever you want to call it. Whatever happens after this, if there's something more, unless it's just a long dreamless sleep, in which case we're not going to know anyway. But if there's something else there, and I was wrong, but I was trying to figure things out, I was thinking about it, I just wasn't taking what somebody else said and then just blindly following it. Like I'm trying to understand it. Then I think that goes back to, some biblical parables of the talents and things like that, where you got to use what God gave you. And how can God be mad at you if you're trying to figure it out, but you were wrong?
And you're
Have all these
doing
limitations.
For me, it's saying, okay, I accept your love. I understand. I understand the crucifixion, so forth. So therefore, so I accept it. And look, I know that's really what you said we need to believe in. So the rest of it, I'm just trying to learn, and I'm flying by the seat of my pants. That's kind of, and what's sad today is that there are churches that say we'll believe in Jesus, or we'll preach Jesus. We won't preach God, or we will do this, is it? And they're trying to be so specific. I don't know that I don't think it feels right or sounds right to not have one without the other, if that makes any sense to you.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to try to understand the difference between symbolism and parable and what you need to know to navigate the world and the way that you need to navigate it. I mean, that's a lot of, I guess you could think of that as like mishmash talk. Like it's no like specific 10 commandment type thing. 10 commandments are pretty good, but as far as the people that think the Bible, much reverence for the Bible, but it can be inspired writing. I'm fine with that. But to say that everything in the Bible is 100% the thing you need to do, right then I'm already thinking, well, what about places that have their own religious texts? What about the Talmud? What about the Quran? What about all these other things that have this? What makes my Bible different from their Bible? And I think it's more of, I understand that faith that's within you. And I think if you have that common ground of, look, I want to do the moral thing. And then you come back to the whole thing of where do you get your morals from? But I think people do have a feeling of what's right and what's wrong. And even in talking to people that weren't raised in America, weren't raised the way I was, I can still see when they do something wrong that I think is wrong, they also think it's wrong. They may have different justifications for it. And maybe I justify actions differently than I would as a kid when I'm just, you're in the religion, whatever religion you're in, whatever thought process you're in, that you're indoctrinated into when you're a kid. I mean, if you're indoctrinated into Christianity, you're indoctrinated into Christianity. If you're indoctrinated to a different religion, it's a different one. That's what it is. But I think, in your person, like in your soul or spirit, that what's the difference between right and wrong. Like it's probably not right to, well, you could name some terrible things. It's I think people know the difference between right and wrong for the most part. But
I was just going to say that, the canonization process for the Bible, and for those listeners that don't know the canonization process, is there's criteria that they go and they will compare any writing to that criteria, and a lot of it has to deal with consistency and so forth. If it matches up, if the people and the places matches up as well, and if they do, then it could be considered, or it could be introduced as a scripture. But as far as what's in the scripture, I just wonder, and you kind of stimulated my thought this way, And that is, of course, we would be dumb if we didn't understand that Scripture was not necessarily written in today's context. People wrote it as they saw it back when they were writing it.
Mm-hmm.
The society and everything else. But the one thing that Scripture does do, which is very positive, it gives a good guideline. But you know what? It promotes people talking. And I think that's where people have gotten it really wrong. Is instead of talking together and sharing ideas on what this scripture could have 100 meanings behind it to touch 100 different hearts. But no, doggone it, we just rather fight and fuss to say, okay, this is what it is. It means only this one thing, and if you don't like it, you go to hell. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of people look at it.
Mm.
And so, I'm not trying to come off as what somebody would call a liberal. What I'm trying to do is say, okay, it's okay to talk about things, and I think the spirit, I think the scripture actually promotes that.
Yeah,
Go ahead. I want to hear what
I'm
you got.
comfortable. I'm comfortable with the Bible as a guideline, as some examples to think about to spark your own thought and your own search for what you think. Yeah, for what you think. Teach you how to think, not what to think. And I know there's plenty of people in every religion that are like, no, whatever this holy text is this holy text, and it's holy because of the way we decided how to include it and all these other things. Well, I'm not reading it in its original language. And even its original language is, if it's from God, is not the original language. I mean, if you're saying it's a divine writing or divine inspired, certainly God's all powerful. Then God could say, I'm going to give it to this person perfectly. But we all know the game of telephone and how that's going to unfold over years and years in the meddling of humans, which are, I want to bend this around so it can be used to
So it will
control these
satisfy
people.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the King James version is King James's version. What monk was writing that? And outside of spelling errors or just the wrong word or the wrong translation, like I've seen a bunch of things that said that the original Mary, the Virgin Mary, really the word meant young girl, that she wasn't a virgin. She was just a young girl. And I know for some people I talk to about that, their faith on the Bible is it's so fervent that they can't get past that. Like that's the thing that's going to trigger them to fight for everything they have on this one issue of, no, Mary was a virgin and it was immaculate. I always say reception, but immaculate conception.
I know. I remember Franco. Okay.
Yeah. So I that's the thing that controls your whole belief in something. Like if that wasn't the case, your whole faith and reason that you are the way you are, that you have the morals you have, that you do what you do, is because because you think Mary was a virgin versus a young child. And doesn't matter either way. It doesn't matter either way to me. And
I understand. I understand.
then you have the crucifixion, or Jesus died and then he came back. Okay, that's fine. I'm good with that. And I'm very thankful for it. If that's how it unfolded, that's great. And the Holy Spirit lives within me. And great. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, please.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's not the case, if it's just a parable, or if Jesus died and then he didn't come back, that doesn't change it for me. But I talked to plenty of people within Christianity for sure that are like, no, that's the main tenement of Christianity, is that he died and then he came back. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of religions that have people dying and coming back. But in the church I grew up in, it was no other religion has that. That's what makes Christianity different, is because Jesus died and for our sins and then came back. It's great if that's the case. It doesn't change my morality if it's not the case. Even if somebody said there is no proof or evidence that Jesus ever existed. I mean, I don't know how you could say that. Either way, for sure, either way. I mean, maybe you can go back to some Roman tax laws or some tax rolls and some records they keep of crucifixions, and okay, that's fine. If it's the case, Jesus existed and he died on the sins so that I could get into heaven, because no matter how good I think I am, no matter what I do, it's all filthy rags, then okay, I'm very thankful for it. And if I'm wrong for saying that, if that's not the case, it doesn't change my morality, then hopefully if I get a chance to stand tall before the man, that there'll be a little amnesty for me, or a little understanding of my human mind trying to wrap around something that the Bible says I can't understand. So I'm just wrestling with that, you know.
Well, and I can give an example. I'm probably a little more simplistic, but at the same point, this is, I've said this before, and people look at me and then they go, well, yeah, it actually makes sense what you're saying. And that is, I think your faith, I think there has to be some logic behind it. I enjoy the fact that there's history. There's a good amount of history that can verify different things about God, different things about Christ, the things that Christ did, etc. It proves that there's a logic behind it. It's not just people, like group of people that got together and said, let's trump up some stuff and get it going. For me, it's like growing up in the Southern Baptist Church. They didn't make wine, they made grape juice. I used to hear that. My question is this: if they really did that, then why does it talk about do not drink until drunkenness? I've never gotten drunk off of Welch's before. So see, I'm simplistic, and of course I'm not making fun of it, but some things, well, like for instance, when Southern Baptist Church was one of the churches that did this went along this way of thought, and that was that women could only go so far in the church. Well, okay, my question is, if that's the case, who was the greatest missionary possibly in history, the one that said he's risen? It was Mary. Now, that's pretty high-tech stuff for her to go in and be telling people somebody like that if she's no count. And I look at it too that here you go, with Jesus being crucified, they went to the tomb, and that tomb, there was nobody in the tomb. Think of the slap in the face that was against Pilate, against the Sadducees, the Pharisees, everybody. Just think how big. Now, the one way they could have showed Jesus was a fake was to come up with that body. People died because they could not bring that body back. And yet people, and when you think about the disciples, people will lie to stay alive. How many people lie to actually die? Now, see, that's not me arguing, okay? That's just, I guess, using country bumpkin common sense. And I do think that in our walk, in our belief, there's faith, but I also believe there's logic. And for me, that's quite a bit of logic. So, that's the reason I'm comfortable where I'm at, if that makes sense. And again, I just think it's awesome that we've been able to talk the way we have, and I've got total respect for you, and I consider you a brother. I appreciate you. I mean, when you look at that, this past hour and whatever, to me, it's been fully worth it. I got me a new brother. So like I said, I've got some schooling behind me, but I'm a country bumpkin. But you know,
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
a
if
pretty
something
happy
makes
pumpkin.
sense,
Yeah.
if something makes sense, it makes sense. It doesn't matter the amount of education that goes into it. I mean, it's so with writing. When you were writing your book,
Yeah.
did you feel like during the process of it, like you were inspired or guided, or there was some creative force that was helping you along with it, or
I'll be
do
honest
you
with
think
you.
it was all from within you?
I hate to read. Me writing a book is probably one of the big miracles because I just don't read a lot. Give me the cliff notes, please. Okay. And that's terrible. I mean, that's probably a terrible thing to say. Uh, but anyway, no, it was. I cried the entire time I wrote it. I wrote it in about 3 4 weeks. I cried like a baby. I relived it. I relived every hurt, but also reliving that hurt as I was writing about the positivity, about the walk in faith. What I did also was it allowed me to see things clearer, because to put it down on paper, I had to follow the story, step one, step two, step three.
Mm-hmm.
And so it even helped clarify things for myself. And when I finished it all, or finished it, one thing I haven't told you is when my son Austin was 2 years old, he one day became very blotchy. He was purple. He became blue. We were living in Texas. We went to the local hospital. They did not understand what was going on. My wife called me. She was scared to death. He was taken to Children's Hospital in Dallas, which is part of Parkland Hospital. And so we stayed up in Dallas with him for weeks, and he kept getting tested. They came back and said there were no platelets in his blood. Testing, multiple times a week. We basically had to kind of dress him like the Michelin Man, if you remember that, because
Mm-hmm.
they actually told us if he skins his knee, he's going to bleed out before you can get him to a hospital. And I'll tell you, that's a hell on earth. That really is. And I don't know, probably 30, excuse me, 30 to 40 tests. They've all come back the same: no platelets, no platelets, no platelets. All of a sudden, they call us one day and they say, we have some news we need to tell you. And naturally, Brenda and I look at each other and we go, my God, they're going to tell us how much time he's got left. And he ended up, there were two doctors on the phone. One of them said, Mr. and Miss Smith, something happened. And I said, we said, yes, sir. He said, well, I can tell you first thing, I've never seen this before. And secondly, I guess we just have to call this a miracle. There's no other explanation for it. I've seen miracles, and he said, I've seen miracles before, so I do believe they can happen, and this is a miracle. Uh, Between his second to last blood test and his last blood test, in those few hours of time, over 325,000 platelets appeared in his blood. So I think we all probably have some miracles in our life, you know, and when I got toward the end of the book, I happened to be looking at the news, and Chicago was having 40 carjackings a day. It's when the city of Oakland was being closed because their workers, the city personnel, couldn't get up and or couldn't get out of their
Mhm.
car and walk into the buildings. This was just months ago, really. And I looked at that, and I thought probably most people are looking at these people on the streets, and they're saying they're the biggest lowlifes in the world. They have no purpose. They're they're terrible. They don't even deserve to breathe a breath of air. I wonder how many of them are facing their own demons because either the way they were treated as a kid or the way they were treated as a teenager. What kind of abuses were they subjected to? Why are they angry? People that are happy don't think about killing other people. You notice that? You got to be pretty PO'd. What are they PO'd about? Now, some of them probably don't have much sense, and they're PO'd because instead of getting a bubble gum pop, they got a Tootsie Roll pop. We have those people in the world.
Mhm.
But what about the ones that are going to die tonight or next week or next month, next year? And they just weren't never given the chance to begin with. So who's fighting with demons? What are the things are we fighting? We're fighting for purpose. We're fighting for love. I'm sure some of them are fighting for that. If not, they're fighting for love. They're fighting because of the fact they've never experienced it. All they know is hate. So I wasn't trying to make excuses for them. And I'm not trying to say nobody, does not deserve the consequences of their own action. But what is do we really know what's going on in our society? Maybe some of us can't help other people because we're too busy fighting our own demons. I didn't write it trying to give everybody the answer. I wrote that last part because you can't beat your demons unless you acknowledge that they're there.
Mhm.
And in my life, I realized being a former pro wrestler and all that stuff, to say it in my wrestling lingo, what I found was that when God is my tag team partner, I know I'm going to win that match because God does not make junk. God does not make junk. So I think that the last part really opened my eyes. So that's what writing the book did for me, brother.
All right. Yeah, I mean, from listening to all that, it to me comes back to that whole thing what we started with, which was, what's the reason for being here? What's the reason to go through all the stuff that humanity goes through, or that a human goes through, that a living thing goes through? What's the purpose of it? So,
You know, sometimes we kind of have our own little interpretations or our own little ways we envision things, which are really just so simple. They may even be laughable by some people, but I can tell you what I feel like. I feel like we got a God that's a loving Father, and He says, "Okay, I want to give you life because I want my children to be, I want to have children around me. I want somebody to love, just like we want somebody to love, you know?
mhm.
And the whole time he said, the whole time he's saying, now, because I love you, for, and I want you to truly love me, I'm going to give you the ability to make the choices in your life. And this is probably going to sound stupid, and I apologize, but I picture a dad rooting for his kid and just saying, please don't go that direction. I told you that would be simple, and if that embarrasses the show, I don't mean it to. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
But if I could just, in that's my simplest way of looking at it, and being able to relate it to someone else. And to me, it's a message of encouragement. Mm-hmm. But if, for God's sakes, this God does not make junk. I mean that, man. I'm tired of people not thinking that nobody will be there for them, or they're wanting to give up. And it could be some of their faults because they don't accept the help and the love that's really around them. They're blinded to it. But in the same respect, sometimes we've probably fallen in showing those people love, or letting them see the love or experience the love. So I guess in some ways I'm saying, if other people share the blame, I'll share the blame with them. I definitely did a lot of the wrong things in my life. And you know what? I accept responsibility for them. Somebody asked me, who's the culprit in the book? I always tell them I am.
What's the best way for people to find your book?
Sure. It is on Amazon. And here, I'll just do this so they can see the colors on it. Okay. So it'll be easier to see. Wrestling with Demons, Mark and Brenda Smith. And it's on Amazon, and it's on Amazon Kindle as well. So I wanted to do that so people wouldn't have to chunk out a bunch of books, a bunch of money for shipping and a paperback. I really want to get it out there to people. I hope they, if they read the book, they'll understand they're not alone. Wrestling with Demons Smith. That's 2 S's, Demons Smith. WrestlingWithDemonsSmith.com. And I haven't done it yet, but for you listeners out there, the one thing we never can get back is time. And you've given us your time today. So to me, I consider that a phenomenal gift. So listeners, thank you. And I do love you, believe it or not. This Georgia boy, Les, love you. And this host right here, he's an awesome guy. And love him too. And he's the real deal. So please encourage him, because this is a labor of love. Back to you, brother.
All right. I appreciate your time. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit here.